The Hartwell family had always been the kind of people who believed in the simple joy of being together. Tom and Linda Hartwell, along with their two children, 12-year-old Emily and 8-year-old Jacob, lived in a modest ranch house outside Fresno, California. Tom worked as an insurance adjuster. Linda taught third grade at the local elementary school, and their kids were the kind who still got excited about family game nights and camping trips. In October 2006, they decided to take a road trip to visit Linda's aging mother in Flagstaff, Arizona. It was supposed to be a long weekend, 4 days of desert highways, roadside diners, and quality time away from the noise of daily life. They left on a Thursday morning, October 12, 2006. Neighbors watched them load up their silver Honda Pilot, waving goodbye as Tom backed out of the driveway. Linda had called her mother that afternoon from somewhere near Barstow to say they were making good time. That was the last anyone ever heard from them. If you're watching from somewhere in the world right now, we'd love to know where. Drop a comment below and let us know. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories like this one. Now let's continue. By Saturday evening, Linda's mother, Margaret, began to worry. The Hartwells were supposed to arrive Friday afternoon. She called their home number repeatedly. No answer. She tried Linda's cell phone, but it went straight to voicemail. By Sunday morning, Margaret contacted the Fresno Police Department to report them missing. Officers took down the details. A family of 4, traveling east on Interstate 40, last known location somewhere in the Mojave Desert. The investigation began immediately. California Highway Patrol issued a BOLO, be on the lookout, for the silver Honda Pilot, license plate 4JTH892. They checked rest stops, gas stations, and motels along the route. They reviewed surveillance footage from every truck stop between Barstow and the Arizona state line. Nothing. It was as if the family had simply evaporated into the vast, unforgiving desert. Search and rescue teams scoured the highways and the rugged terrain on either side. Helicopters flew grid patterns over the Mojave, looking for any sign of a vehicle that might have veered off the road. Volunteers from Fresno organized search parties, distributing flyers with the faces of Tom, Linda, Emily, and Jacob at every gas station and diner they could find. Local news stations ran the story for weeks. Tom's co-workers set up a tip line. Linda's students made posters, but as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, hope began to fade. The case grew cold. Theories circulated, some darker than others. Had they been victims of foul play? Had Tom, under some unknown pressure, driven them all into the desert to disappear? Had they encountered someone dangerous at a rest stop? The lack of evidence made it impossible to know. Over time, the story of the Hartwell family became another tragic mystery, a cautionary tale whispered among travelers on lonely stretches of highway. Linda's mother, Margaret, never stopped looking. She kept a box of newspaper clippings, police reports, and photographs in her living room. Every year, on the anniversary of their disappearance, she would call the police department, asking if there had been any updates. The answer was always the same: no new leads. Tom's brother, Paul, hired a private investigator in 2008, but even that yielded nothing. The investigator concluded that without a body, a vehicle, or a witness, there was simply nowhere left to search. Years passed. Emily would have graduated high school in 2012. Jacob would have been a teenager. Linda's mother passed away in 2015, still waiting for answers. Paul Hartwell tried to move on, but the absence of closure haunted him. He couldn't bring himself to clean out his brother's house, which sat empty and slowly deteriorating on the outskirts of Fresno. The case file at the police department gathered dust, periodically reviewed, but never solved. Then, in the summer of 2023, something changed. A technology company based in San Jose called TerraTrace had been developing advanced GPS data recovery techniques, primarily for commercial fleet management. They had pioneered a method to extract and reconstruct historical GPS data from old cell phone towers. even from devices that had long since stopped transmitting. The company's CEO, wanting to demonstrate the technology's potential for humanitarian purposes, reached out to law enforcement agencies across California, offering to assist with cold cases involving missing persons. Detective Ramon Gutierrez, who had recently been assigned to review unsolved cases in Fresno County, came across the Hartwell file. He remembered hearing about it when he was a rookie officer in 2006. The case had always bothered him. The complete absence of any physical evidence, the seeming impossibility of a family vanishing so thoroughly. When he learned about TerraTrace's offer, he immediately thought of the Hartwells. He contacted the company and provided them with the details: Linda's cell phone number, Tom's cell phone number, the date and approximate route of travel. It took TerraTrace's engineers 3 months to process the data. They had to sift through archived records from multiple cell phone providers, reconstruct tower pings from devices that were no longer in service, and account for changes in network infrastructure over nearly 2 decades. But finally, in late September 2023, they produced a map. A thin red line traced across the screen, showing the path of Linda Hartwell's cell phone on October 12th and 13th, 2006. Detective Gutierrez stared at the screen in his office, his coffee growing cold as he absorbed what he was seeing. The GPS data showed that the Hartwells had indeed traveled east on Interstate 40, passing through Barstow as expected. But then, about 60 miles past Barstow, near the tiny, unincorporated community of Ludlow, the path deviated. Instead of continuing east toward Needles and the Arizona border, the phone signal turned sharply south onto a small, unmarked road. The red line continued for approximately 8 miles before stopping abruptly in an area that, on the satellite map, appeared to be nothing but empty desert. Scrubland dotted with Joshua trees and low, rocky hills. Gutierrez felt a chill run down his spine. He zoomed in on the location. There was no town, no rest area, no reason for anyone to turn off the highway there. He cross-referenced the coordinates with topographical maps and found that the area was part of a vast stretch of BLM land, Bureau of Land Management, used occasionally by off-roaders but otherwise desolate and rarely visited. The nearest paved road was miles away. He immediately assembled a team. 2 days later, on a cool October morning, almost exactly 17 years after the Hartwells had disappeared, Detective Gutierrez, along with 3 other officers, a forensic specialist, and a guide familiar with the terrain, drove out to the location indicated by the GPS data. They left Interstate 40 at the same turnoff, following a dirt road that was barely visible, overgrown with creosote bushes and cholla cactus. The road wound through the desert, rutted and uneven, clearly not maintained in years. About 7 miles in, one of the officers spotted something. A glint of metal barely visible through the brush. They stopped the vehicles and approached on foot. And there it was, a silver Honda Pilot. Its paint faded and sand-blasted by years of desert wind, partially obscured by tumbleweeds and desert vegetation. The license plate, though covered in dust, was still legible. 4J892. Gutierrez radioed for additional support. Crime scene investigators, a medical examiner, and a tow truck capable of navigating the rough terrain. As they waited, he walked slowly around the vehicle, his heart pounding. The driver's side door was slightly ajar, the windshield was cracked. Inside, he could see the outline of personal belongings: a child's backpack, a road atlas, a thermos. When the forensic team arrived, they carefully processed the scene. What they found painted a tragic picture. All 4 members of the Hartwell family were inside the vehicle. Tom was in the driver's seat, Linda beside him, and Emily and Jacob in the back. There were no signs of trauma, no evidence of violence. The medical examiner would later determine that they had died of dehydration and exposure, likely within 3 to 5 days of arriving at that location. The question that haunted everyone was, why had they turned off the highway? Detective Gutierrez found part of the answer in the vehicle. Tom's cell phone, though long dead, was recovered from the center console. Later analysis of the phone's final data showed that Tom had been using a GPS navigation app, one of the early, less reliable versions that had been common in 2006. The app had apparently malfunctioned or provided incorrect directions, routing them off the highway onto what it suggested was a shortcut to Flagstaff. In the days before smartphones and real-time GPS updates, such errors were not uncommon. Tom, trusting the technology and perhaps eager to shave time off the drive, had followed the directions. The dirt road had seemed passable at first, but as they ventured deeper into the desert, the terrain became rougher. At some point, the Honda Pilot had bottomed out on a rock or gotten stuck in soft sand. Tom had tried to reverse, to maneuver out, but the vehicle was trapped. A handwritten note found in Linda's purse provided heartbreaking insight into their final days. Written in pencil on the back of a gas station receipt, it read, "Thursday night. Stuck. Tried digging out." Tom walked back toward highway, but too far. No water left. Tried calling, but no signal. Praying someone finds this. "Tell Mom we love her. Tell Paul we're sorry." They had been less than 8 miles from the highway, but in the vast, featureless desert, that distance might as well have been 100. Tom had apparently attempted to walk back for help, but the combination of heat, distance, and lack of water had forced him to return to his family. They had stayed together, waiting for rescue that never came. In October 2006, that stretch of desert saw almost no traffic. The dirt road they had turned onto was used so infrequently that their vehicle, obscured by brush and the desert's natural camouflage, had gone unnoticed for 17 years. The recovery was somber. The Hartwell family was finally brought home to Fresno. Paul Hartwell, now in his 60s, arranged for a private funeral. The closure he had waited nearly 2 decades for was bittersweet. He finally knew what had happened to his brother and his family, but the senselessness of it, the cruel twist of a GPS error, was almost too much to bear. The story made national news. It sparked conversations about the reliability of navigation technology, the dangers of desert travel, and the importance of letting someone know your exact route when taking a road trip. TerraTrace's role in solving the case was widely praised, and the company began working with law enforcement agencies across the country to apply their technology to other cold cases. Detective Gutierrez attended the funeral, standing quietly in the back. He had spent 17 years in law enforcement, but this case affected him more than most. As he watched Paul Hartwell place flowers on the caskets of his brother's family, Gutierrez thought about all the small decisions that lead to tragedy. A faulty GPS, a turn onto an unmarked road, a moment of trust in technology that proved fatal. In the weeks that followed, a small memorial was placed near the turnoff on Interstate 40, a simple stone marker with the names of Tom, Linda, Emily, and Jacob Hartwell, and the dates of their disappearance and discovery. Travelers occasionally stopped to leave flowers or notes, a reminder of a family who had set out on a simple road trip and never made it home. Paul Hartwell eventually sold his brother's house, but he kept the box of photographs and mementos. He looked through it sometimes, remembering the way Tom used to laugh, the way Linda would hum while cooking, the way Emily and Jacob would argue over board games. The GPS data had given him answers, but it could never give him back the years of not knowing, the holidays spent wondering, the hope that had slowly withered into resignation. The Mojave Desert, vast and indifferent, kept its secret for 17 years. It took advanced technology, a dedicated detective, and a company willing to donate its resources to finally reveal the truth. The Hartwell family's story is a reminder of how fragile our lives are, how a single wrong turn can alter everything, and how sometimes the answers we seek are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone with the right tools to uncover them. The discovery of the Hartwell family sent ripples through communities far beyond Fresno. In the months following the recovery, Paul Hartwell found himself contacted by dozens of families who had lost loved ones under similar circumstances, people who had vanished on road trips, hikers who never returned, travelers who seemed to disappear into thin air. Each conversation was painful, but Paul felt a responsibility to share what he had learned. He became an advocate for the use of advanced technology in solving cold cases, working closely with TerraTrace and speaking at conferences about missing persons investigations. One family in particular reached out to him in early 2024, the Kowalskis from Bend, Oregon. Their son, 23-year-old Derek, had disappeared in 2009 while driving from Oregon to his new job in Phoenix. Like the Hartwells, Derek had simply vanished somewhere along his route, his truck never found, no trace left behind. Paul connected them with Detective Gutierrez and TerraTrace, hoping that the same technology might provide answers. Meanwhile, the Fresno Police Department received authorization to apply TerraTrace's GPS recovery method to 15 other cold cases involving missing persons who had disappeared while traveling through California. The technology wasn't perfect. It required that the missing person had a cell phone with them, that the phone had been on at the time of disappearance, and that cell tower data from that period still existed in archived form. But when all those conditions aligned, the results could be extraordinary. Detective Gutierrez threw himself into the work. The Hartwell case had reminded him why he had become a police officer in the first place, not to chase criminals, but to bring peace to families who were suffering. He spent long nights reviewing case files, identifying which disappearances might be solvable with the new technology. He learned to read the patterns in GPS data, to understand how terrain and roads appeared on satellite imagery, to distinguish between normal travel routes and the kinds of deviations that might indicate trouble. In March 2024, his work paid off again. A hiker named Marcus Chen, who had disappeared in 2011 near Kings Canyon National Park, was located using recovered GPS data from his phone. Marcus had apparently taken a wrong turn on an unmarked trail and fallen down a steep ravine, coming to rest in an area so densely forested and remote that search teams had missed it years earlier. His family, after 13 years of uncertainty, finally had closure, but the Hartwell case continued to haunt those who knew the details. Paul commissioned a private investigator to dig deeper into the GPS malfunction that had led his brother down that fatal road. What he discovered was troubling. The navigation app Tom had been using, a popular program in the mid-2000s, had a documented history of routing errors in rural areas. The company that created it had received dozens of complaints between 2004 and 2007 about dangerous or impossible routes being suggested, particularly in the American Southwest, where roads were often poorly mapped. In at least 3 other instances, drivers had been directed onto unmaintained dirt roads or closed routes. 2 of those incidents had resulted in vehicles becoming stuck, though in those cases, the drivers had been rescued within hours. The software company had quietly settled several lawsuits and eventually discontinued the product in 2008, replacing it with a more sophisticated system. But for the Hartwells, driving through the Mojave in October 2006, that update had come too late. Paul considered filing a lawsuit, but most of the company's executives from that era were long retired, and the statute of limitations had expired years ago. More importantly, he realized no amount of money would bring his brother's family back. Instead, he channeled his energy into something more constructive. He established the Hartwell Foundation, a non-profit organization dedicated to improving safety for travelers in remote areas and funding the use of GPS recovery technology for cold case investigations. The Foundation's first initiative was to work with the California Department of Transportation to install better warning signs at unmarked turnoffs along major desert highways. Large, reflective signs now warned drivers, "No services, unmaintained road, do not follow GPS onto this route." They also provided funding for satellite communication devices to be available for rental at visitor centers near national parks and desert recreation areas, ensuring that travelers who ventured off main roads would have a way to call for help even without cell service. Detective Gutierrez accepted a position on the Foundation's advisory board. He continued his work with the Fresno Police Department, but dedicated a portion of his time to training other law enforcement agencies on the use of GPS data recovery in missing persons cases. He traveled to conferences in Phoenix, Denver, and Albuquerque, sharing the story of the Hartwells and demonstrating how technology that hadn't existed when they disappeared had finally revealed their fate. At one such conference in Las Vegas in the fall of 2024, Gutierrez met a woman named Rebecca Torres. She was a senior engineer at TerraTrace and had been part of the team that recovered the Hartwell GPS data. Over coffee in the hotel lobby, she told him something that had been weighing on her mind. "There are probably hundreds of cases like this," she said, stirring her coffee absently. "People who made one wrong turn, got stuck somewhere remote, and were never found. Before cell phones, there was no way to track them. But now, even years later, if we can access the archived data, we can find them. The question is whether we have the resources to do it." Gutierrez nodded slowly. He had been thinking the same thing. Every solved case required months of data processing, coordination between multiple agencies, and significant computing power. TerraTrace had been generous in donating their services, but they were a private company with commercial obligations. They couldn't process every cold case for free. "What if we could get federal funding?" Gutierrez suggested. "The FBI has programs for cold case investigations. If we could show them the success rate we've had so far." Rebecca's eyes lit up. "That could work. We'd need to put together a proposal, show concrete results, demonstrate the cost-benefit analysis." Over the next several months, they did exactly that. Working with Paul Hartwell and the Foundation, they compiled data on the cases that had been solved using GPS recovery technology. They calculated the costs involved and projected how many outstanding missing persons cases might be solvable with the same methods. In early 2025, they submitted a grant proposal to the Department of Justice for a pilot program that would apply GPS data recovery to cold cases nationwide. While they waited for a response, life in Fresno slowly returned to its normal rhythm. The media attention around the Hartwell case faded. Tom and Linda's former neighbors moved away or passed on. The elementary school where Linda had taught was eventually torn down and rebuilt. The insurance office where Tom had worked closed its doors when the company consolidated into a regional headquarters. Time, as it always does, moved forward. But Paul Hartwell made sure his brother's family wasn't forgotten. Every October 12th, he drove out to the memorial on Interstate 40. He would sit there for a while, watching the traffic rush past, thinking about how many people were hurrying along that highway with no idea that a family had died just a few miles away, waiting for help that never came. He would leave fresh flowers and sometimes a small toy for Emily and Jacob, a reminder that they had been children with futures that should have unfolded. On the anniversary, in October 2025, Paul wasn't alone. Detective Gutierrez joined him, along with Rebecca Torres and several volunteers from the Foundation. They had received word just days earlier that the Department of Justice grant had been approved. Over the next 3 years, GPS data recovery technology would be applied to more than 200 cold cases across the United States. Families who had been waiting decades for answers might finally get closure. As they stood by the memorial in the cooling desert air, watching the sun begin its descent toward the horizon, Paul felt something he hadn't experienced in years. Not quite peace, but perhaps acceptance. His brother's death had been senseless, the result of a cascade of small failures. Faulty software, inadequate signage, the simple bad luck of getting stuck in a place where no one would see them. But from that tragedy had come something meaningful. Other families would be spared years of uncertainty. Other people who had made one wrong turn would be found and brought home. Detective Gutierrez placed a hand on Paul's shoulder. "They'd be proud of what you've built," he said quietly. "Tom and Linda. They'd be proud that something good came from this." Paul nodded, his throat tight. "I just wish it hadn't taken 17 years. "I know," Gutierrez replied. "But we found them. That's what matters now." As they drove back toward Fresno that evening, Paul thought about the note his sister-in-law had written on that gas station receipt, found clutched in her purse all those years later. "Tell Mom we love her. Tell Paul we're sorry." He had never understood what Linda had meant by "we're sorry." Sorry for what? For following a GPS, for trusting technology, for taking a wrong turn that anyone might have taken. Now, finally, he understood. They were sorry for the worry they would cause, for the unanswered questions, for the years of searching and wondering. They had known, in those final days, trapped in the desert heat, that people would be looking for them. They had known that their disappearance would cause pain, and in her last coherent moments, Linda had wanted her family to know that they hadn't meant to cause that suffering. "It's okay," Paul whispered to the darkening desert outside his window. "You're home now. It's okay." The Honda Pilot had been processed as evidence and eventually released to Paul. He had chosen not to keep it, couldn't bear to see the vehicle where his nephew and niece had spent their final hours. Instead, he donated it to a forensics training program at a community college where students studying criminal justice could learn from it. The vehicle's GPS unit, the faulty technology that had led the Hartwells astray, was removed and became part of a display at the Foundation's headquarters, a cautionary reminder of how our increasing reliance on technology, while often helpful, can sometimes lead us dangerously astray. In the years that followed, the Hartwell Foundation grew. They partnered with national parks to install emergency beacon stations at trailheads. They funded research into better satellite tracking for vehicles traveling in remote areas. They worked with tech companies to improve the accuracy of navigation systems and to build in better warnings when routes led into potentially dangerous territory. And they continued to fund GPS data recovery for cold cases, bringing closure to dozens more families. The desert road where the Hartwells had died was eventually closed entirely, blocked with concrete barriers and signs directing travelers to stay on the interstate. The exact spot where their vehicle had sat for 17 years was left undisturbed, marked only by a small cairn of rocks that hikers occasionally added to when they ventured into the area. The desert, with its harsh beauty and unforgiving nature, reclaimed the tire tracks and the disturbed earth, erasing the physical evidence of tragedy, while the memory lived on in the hearts of those who knew the story. Detective Gutierrez retired in 2027, having spent the final years of his career focused almost exclusively on cold cases and missing persons investigations. At his retirement party, Paul Hartwell gave a speech, thanking him for his dedication and for never giving up on finding the truth about what had happened to Tom, Linda, Emily, and Jacob. The two men had become close friends, bound together by the case that had changed both their lives. The story of the Hartwell family became a teaching case in criminal justice programs, in search and rescue training courses, and in technology ethics classes. It raised important questions about our relationship with the tools we trust our lives to, about the vast and dangerous landscapes that still exist, even in our mapped and monitored world, and about the importance of never giving up on the missing, no matter how much time has passed. For Paul Hartwell, now in his 70s, the work continues. He still visits the memorial every October, still thinks about his brother's laugh and his sister-in-law's kindness. The pain of loss never fully disappears, but it has transformed into something purposeful. Every family that gets closure because of the Foundation's work, every person found and brought home, is a small victory against the randomness and cruelty of loss. And somewhere in the archives of cell phone companies, in the data centers where information from years past is stored, there are still traces of other lives, other journeys that ended in mystery. Thanks to the technology that found the Hartwells and to the people dedicated to using it for good, some of those mysteries will be solved. Some of those families will get answers. Some of those lost people will be brought home. The desert keeps its secrets, but not forever. Not anymore.